Imagine you're walking into a room, and like the moment you cross the threshold, the very geometry of the floor, the texture of the walls, the way the acoustics bounce off the ceiling, it all just begins to silently dictate your behavior.
Right, it's completely invisible to you.
Exactly. It strips away your free will so subtly that you actually believe you're the one making the choices. I mean, have you ever really thought about how much of your daily behavior is dictated by the invisible rules of the physical spaces you occupy?
It's a profoundly unsettling concept when you really, pause to consider it, because we love to believe we're the sovereign masters of our own actions.
Oh, for sure. We think we're fully in charge.
Right, we walk into a building, we sit where we choose, we speak to whom we want, but the reality is that environments are highly engineered, whether it's the layout of a grocery store directing your eyes to premium brands, or the architecture of a public plaza designed specifically to prevent people from lingering.
Yeah, the hostile architecture stuff.
Exactly. We are constantly being manipulated by the spaces around us.
Well, today we're going to show you exactly how deep those rules go. We're going on this massive journey to explore what we're calling systems of consequence.
I like that term.
Yeah, it fits perfectly. We're going to look at how the rules of the spaces we occupy and, well, the cosmic rules of cause and effect fundamentally shape our reality. And we're pulling from an incredibly diverse range of material today for this deep dive.
We really are. It's a huge stack of sources.
It is. We've got a deep lore dive into a dark fantasy universe called the Broken Tavern, architectural analyses of 1960s interior design, Eastern philosophies on karma and Vedic astrology, and a surprisingly gross look at actual medieval history and 15th century humor.
And the underlying mechanics across all of these seemingly disparate topics are strikingly similar.
Yeah, it's wild how they connect.
We're looking at how systems, whether they're sunken living rooms from the mid-20th century, astrological birth charts, or fictional cosmic meat grinders, how they read us, process us, and ultimately force a consequence upon us.
And to really understand how this spatial manipulation works, I think we need to start with a space that is entirely designed to hack human psychology, right? I'm talking about the 1960s conversation pit.
Oh, absolutely. The classic sunken lounge.
Yeah. If you've ever watched the TV show Mad Men, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Think of Don Draper's jaw-dropping mid-century apartment.
Well, and on the east side.
Exactly. Right in the middle of this sprawling open-plan living room, there is this sunken lounge area, a pit literally carved into the floor, lined with a brown sectional sofa and pristine white carpet.
It is such a fascinating piece of architectural psychology. And, well, television shows like Mad Men definitely brought the aesthetic back into the modern cultural zeitgeist. The concept of the conversation pit was famously popularized much earlier.
Right, in the 50s, I think.
Yes. Specifically, we look to the Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen. In 1957, he designed the Miller House in Columbus, Indiana. And he approached architecture and furniture not as separate entities that you simply place inside a box, but as a unified, inescapable system.
So when you look at the design psychology of Saarinen's conversation pit, it's actually incredibly aggressive in what it demands from the people interacting with it.
Oh, highly aggressive.
Because in a traditional open-plan living room, which was this huge post-war trend, right? Tearing down those compartmentalized Victorian walls, the social energy just tends to diffuse.
Right, you get all these satellite groups.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A couple of people might be standing over by the kitchen island holding drinks. Someone is sitting on a bar stool looking at their phone. Two people are over on a couch. Someone else is looking out the window. The room is open, but the people are completely fractured.
Precisely. The open plan essentially created a crisis of intimacy. So Saarinen's solution was the sunken pit. By dropping the floor instead of raising walls, the designer creates this intuitive, invisible boundary.
Because you don't feel closed in. Your sightlines are still completely clear to the rest of the house and the windows.
Right. But the physical act of stepping down into the pit forces a centralization.
Everyone has to descend into the exact same space.
Yeah.
And because of how the built-in seating is arranged, usually in a tight square or a U shape, everyone is suddenly forced to the exact same eye level.
Which is a huge psychological shift.
It really is. You can't have someone standing over you dominating the conversation with their physical height. You can't really hide in the back corner either. It entirely eliminates those satellite groups.
It forces intimate face-to-face interaction, but it achieves this without ruining the open, airy flow of the modern home.
And the sensory details of these spaces were also highly engineered to enforce this behavior, right?
Oh, absolutely. Conversation pits thrived on tactile, heavy materials. The designs utilized thick, fuzzy carpets, wool blends, suede, and corduroy.
It's so quintessentially 60s and 70s, just yards and yards of heavy corduroy.
Yeah, but the corduroy and the wool, they weren't just aesthetic choices. They served a vital mechanical function.
Wait, really? Like an acoustic thing?
Exactly. In a large, open-plan house with hard floors and glass walls, sound bounces, it becomes this chaotic, overlapping echo.
Oh, that makes sense, like being in an empty cafeteria.
Right. So the conversation pit, by dropping the elevation and lining the space with these heavy textured materials and large overstuffed cushions, it creates a literal acoustic microclimate. The fabrics act as natural sound baffles. It absorbs the ambient noise of the house and keeps the voices within the pit clear, warm, and contained.
I have to ask, though, I mean, is this actually benevolent design?
How do you mean?
Because when you describe the mechanics of it, the forced eye level, the acoustic isolation, the physical descent, it feels less like a cozy gathering space and a bit more like being lowered into a velvet spiderweb.
A velvet spiderweb. I like that.
Think about it. You step down into this pit, the sound design traps your voice, everyone is staring directly at you. You literally have to talk to your guest. There is no escape. You're completely manipulated by the architecture into vulnerability.
That is a very sharp observation. Now, trap implies malice, but it is undeniably a form of spatial engineering. You are being corralled into a specific social behavior by the geometry of the floor plan.
Yeah, it's wild. The architect is dictating your social interactions decades after the house was actually built.
It is a system of consequence, and the consequence is forced intimacy. The environment demands a reaction.
Okay, so if a mid-century conversation pit is an architecture designed to manipulate you into making a human connection, what does an architecture look like that is designed to manipulate you into a fight for your very existence?
Oh, that's a massive pivot.
Let's leave the 1960s and cross over into the dark fantasy universe of the Broken Tavern. Because you thought the velvet spiderweb was an aggressive piece of interior design? Wait until you hear the lore behind this place.
It really is a masterclass in hostile architecture. The premise of the Broken Tavern takes the concept of environmental manipulation and just weaponizes it on a cosmic scale.
Right, so that the untrained mortal eye, if you're an adventurer standing at the edge of the Whispering Woods, the tavern looks like a spooky, impossibly tall Gothic mansion. It's swallowed by thick fog, towering spires, gargoyles. It basically looks like a standard haunted house trope that you'd find in any fantasy role-playing game.
But that Gothic exterior is a complete fabrication.
Just a facade.
Exactly. It's merely a projection. The lore explicitly states that this facade is an interface, designed solely to make the reality of the place comprehensible to fragile mortal perception.
Because if they saw the real thing, their brains would melt.
Right. If a human mind were to perceive the building's true form, it would cause immediate psychological collapse.
Because the tavern isn't built of stone or wood. It's a living, breathing anomaly. It exists simultaneously across infinite dimensions, violently intersecting countless planes of reality all at once.
It's hard to even visualize.
I know. Think of the multiverse as a massive, chaotic stack of papers blowing in the wind. The tavern is the cosmic pin driven right through the center, holding that endless nexus of universes and timelines together.
And this structural pin was forged by two opposing deities to maintain a highly fractured, volatile equilibrium.
Right. Baal and the Keeper.
Yes. On one side, you have Baal, the Lord of Demons and God of War. Baal fuels the chaos. He ensures that the interior of the tavern remains a perpetual crucible of violence and conflict.
Just nonstop carnage.
Exactly. And on the other side is the Keeper, a neutral god of preservation. The Keeper's entire function is to maintain the structural integrity of the anomaly, ensuring that the dimensional pin doesn't simply snap under the pressure and cause total reality failure.
Two gods locked in a permanent stalemate, using a building as their anchor. But the most terrifying detail in the lore is the biological imperative of the space.
It's hungry.
Yes. The tavern is starving. It's an apex predator in architectural form, and it feeds on the multiverse itself. It doesn't just house monsters in its basement. It weaponizes its own hallways, its gravity, its very layout to consume the people who walk through its doors.
And this is where the comparison to the conversation pit becomes so vital. The tavern is a reactionary organism.
Right.
Just as Saarinen floor plan reads your desire to drift and forces you into the center, the tavern reads the soul imprint, the intent, and the psychological weight of the adventurers who enter it. But instead of forcing a polite conversation, it forces a reckoning.
The inhabitants of this universe refer to the tavern's internal shifting as the grinding, which is just an awful name.
Very evocative, though.
Oh, incredibly. Because the building bridges infinite realities, its internal architecture is fundamentally unstable. It never stays still. It violently, audibly shifts and adapts.
So you can never map it reliably.
Right. Imagine you're a seasoned adventurer. You push through these heavy oak doors in what looks like a decaying medieval library. You step through, and suddenly you emerge into a chamber of gleaming, hostile sci-fi machinery. Or, like the gravity inverts, and you fall onto the ceiling of an alien ecosystem pulsing with toxic, bioluminescent flora.
And the crucial element here is that these architectural shifts are not random.
No, it's deeply personal.
Exactly. The tavern actively scans the fracture points within the mind of each intruder. It reaches into your psyche, finds your specific fears, your suppressed memories, and the physics of your native world, and it instantly rearranges its corridors to manifest a personalized crucible.
It's curating a bespoke nightmare.
Yes, to test your exact mental breaking points. It routes adventurers through its infinite halls the same way a warehouse routes inventory, sorting them by their psychological vulnerabilities.
Put yourself in that scenario for a second. You walk into a building, and the building instantly knows your deepest regrets. It knows the specific anxieties that keep you awake at night. And silently, the geometry of the room you're standing in alters itself to exploit that exact weakness.
It's terrifying.
It's not a dungeon you're passively exploring. It is a digestive tract that is actively, intelligently trying to break you down.
Which brings us to the underlying physics of this universe. To understand how the tavern breaks you down, we have to look at the ultimate unbreakable law that governs this cosmic meat grinder. They call it Rule 10, the law of temporal weight.
Rule 10. This is where the concept of consequence becomes absolutely brutal, and where the lore really separates itself from traditional fantasy tropes.
Denfinitely. It rejects the standard hero narrative.
Yeah, because we're incredibly used to stories where the hero makes a massive tactical error, gets a little bruised, maybe their armor gets dented, but ultimately they bounce back, defeat the villain, and ride off into the sunset, completely intact.
Right, the classic hero's journey.
But the tavern does not allow for that. In this universe, there is zero plot armor. Survival is meticulously measured, calculated, and violently enforced.
Under Rule 10, every tactical error, every moment of hesitation, and even the victories demand a permanent price in flesh, blood, or sanity.
There's no free lunch.
None at all. The system of the tavern doesn't distinguish between failure and success in a moral sense. It only balances the cost of the action. Action requires energy, and the tavern extracts that energy directly from the individual.
The character histories in the lore illustrate this perfectly. Like, look at the story of Zelthun.
Oh, Zalthon is a great example.
He's described as a biomechanical alien, a void caller. He managed to infiltrate the tavern, and his goal wasn't just to survive. He tried to hack the root directory of the building itself.
Very ambitious.
Yeah, he wanted to steal the god's power, bypass the grinding, and basically usurp the system.
And he was technically successful in accessing that power. But what is fascinating is how Rule 10 exacted its payment. Zalthun attempted to perceive the underlying code of reality, the raw, unfiltered truth of the multiverse.
Which is a huge cosmic no-no.
Exactly. The consequence of that hubris was swift. The tavern's internal defense mechanisms, the spire lasers, permanently destroyed his eyes.
It's the ultimate equivalent exchange. I mean, he gained this massive god-tier buff to his void sense, which is this advanced cosmic echolocation that allows him to perceive dimensional shifts. But the physical cost was total, permanent visual loss.
He wanders the infinite halls with destroyed, featureless sockets.
He tried to see too much, so the system blinded him.
Then you have cases where the intent was entirely peaceful, yet the consequence was just as devastating.
Right, Silas.
Yes, consider Silas the cartographer. Silas had no ambition for conquest or godhood. His singular goal was to map the shifting geometry of the tavern.
Which seems harmless enough.
It does. But to achieve this, to navigate the grinding without triggering the tavern's aggressive defense mechanisms, he had to maintain a state of true neutrality. He had to observe the horrors and the violence without ever intervening or passing judgment.
Which sounds like a smart strategy, right? Keep your head down, don't pick sides, just draw the map.
But Rule 10 dictates that true neutrality is not a safe haven. It is an excruciating, agonizing physical discipline.
Because neutrality takes energy, too.
Exactly. To survive the immense dimensional shear fields of the shifting architecture without anchoring himself to any specific reality, Silas's physical body could not remain intact. His entire lower half was disintegrated.
And the lore describes his lower body being replaced by hovering cyan astral geometry.
Yes.
So he survived, and he succeeded in becoming the observer, but the cost was his humanity. He's now a literal physical bridge between dimensions, forever severed from physical reality. He can never touch the ground again.
His neutrality cost him his physical tether to the world.
And even those who enter with noble intentions are twisted by this law. Like Captain Vexus, this lizard commander who entered the tavern seeking justice for his fallen soldiers.
Right, a classic paladin archetype.
Yeah, he wanted to hold the forces of the tavern accountable. But he found a cold, calculating, uncaring universe. To survive the endless waves of monsters and the grinding architecture, he had to abandon his ideals. The lore states, to defeat a monster, Captain Vexus became a tyrant.
He's survived, but the noble hero he used to be is dead. Only a scarred, ruthless survivor remains.
It's so bleak.
It is. And this shift away from the untouchable, morally pure hero is not just a quirk of this specific fictional universe. It's highly reflective of a broader, real-world trend in modern literature. We see this documented in cultural analysis.
Like the Breitbart piece in our sources.
Yeah, precisely. It's important to note we're looking at this objectively as cultural commentary, not endorsing the political framing of the publication itself, but the article observes a massive shift toward what is categorized as grim dark fantasy.
Right. Modern fantasists, authors like Joe Abercrombie or Matthew Woodring Stover, they're moving away from the Tolkien-esque model of the noble knight fighting the Dark Lord.
We're writing these incredibly cynical, morally ambiguous worlds.
Exactly. In these stories, the characters rarely acquit themselves heroically. Instead of grand speeches about honor, you get main characters locked in bitter, self-hating monologues, constantly questioning if their survival is even worth the horrific things they have to do to achieve it.
It's a fascinating reflection of modern anxieties.
Oh.
One literary review noted that in these contemporary stories, a protagonist might spend a significant portion of a book paralyzed, chained to a stone floor, dealing with literal gangrene eating away at their limbs.
It's visceral, it's dark, and it completely strips away the romanticization of conflict.
And The Broken Tavern is a perfect, crystallized embodiment of this cultural shift. It presents a bankrupt, entirely uncaring universe.
The traditional concept of a hero who wins cleanly, saves the day, and remains morally unblemished is just entirely dead in this setting.
Completely dead.
In the tavern, if you win, you still lose a profound piece of yourself. You are marked by permanent physical scars that act as a ledger, a receipt of what you sacrificed to survive Rule 10.
But if Rule 10 simply demands a cost for every action, how does the tavern differentiate between the actions? How does a building decide what specific nightmare to throw at a given adventurer?
Oh, right, the internal judgment system.
Yes. This brings us to the internal judgment system of the anomaly, the karma scale.
And this is where the world building gets so incredibly visual. The tavern judges its occupants based on this karma scale, but it doesn't care about human concepts of right and wrong. It doesn't possess a moral compass.
No, it only weighs the impact and the resonance of your actions.
And the environment physically, immediately manifests that judgment in what the lore calls the aesthetics of alignment.
It's environmental storytelling at its most literal. Let's examine how a traditional lawful good character is processed by the tavern. Suppose an adventurer enters who is driven by rigid honor, a strict adherence to vows, and a genuine willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. The tavern detects the dense, calculated structure of that soul. In response, the architecture around that individual will literally bathe in warm, amber light.
It actually affects their abilities, too.
Yeah.
If that lawful good individual is a magic user, their spells will manifest as pristine, stellar blue geometric grids.
Right, it looks orderly.
Yeah, it's symmetrical, mathematically perfect, crystalline. The magic looks like an extension of their rigid, orderly mindset.
But what happens when that same individual breaks? Suppose the grinding wears them down. They succumb to profound grief or obsession or malice.
Which happens constantly in this lore.
Exactly. As their internal state degrades, they begin generating dark karma. The environment reacts instantly to this internal shift. The warm amber light plunges into deep, desaturated shadows. Sickly void tones of purple and black bleed into the stone.
And the magic transforms with them. It undergoes what is called abyssal decay.
Such a great term.
It really is. And it's not just a color palette swap. The physics of the magic change. Instead of clean, symmetrical geometry, their spells physically manifest their malice and grief into brutal, jagged hooks, rusted chains, and erratic bursts of dark energy.
The tavern ensures that power cannot conceal truth.
Right. Your magic becomes a public, unavoidable record of your corrupted soul. You literally cannot hide your true nature from the building.
And the tavern's reaction to this dark karma is not passive. It views extreme concentrations of dark karma as a systemic parasite.
It wants it gone.
Yes. When it detects an entity generating massive amounts of abyssal decay, it doesn't merely test them with shifting hallways. It unleashes its most aggressive, unyielding armored guardians. The anomaly treats the corrupted individual like a virus, deploying white blood cells to mercilessly crush and excise the infection.
The way this universe subverts traditional fantasy tropes to fit this karmic system is just brilliant. Take the dwarves, for example.
Oh, the Wild Forgers.
Yeah. If you look at almost any other fantasy setting, dwarves are monolithic. They're subterranean miners, obsessed with dead stone, gold, and iron. They build massive underground forges that belch smoke, and they craft mechanical contraptions.
But the Broken Tavern completely inverts that expectation. In this universe, we have the Dwarven Wild Forgers. They are not subterranean miners at all. They're forest-dwelling survivalists.
Right. Instead of striking hammers against dead iron, they operate what is known as a living forge.
They cultivate highly toxic, bioluminescent alien flora. They take these living, dangerous plants and shape them into adaptive armor and living weapons.
They weave hardened vines into exoskeletal plating. They actually implant symbiotic flora directly into their own flesh to enhance their strength and resilience.
And this biological approach places them in direct, violent ideological conflict with the sprawling, industrial capitalist war machines that frequently bleed into the tavern from other overlapping dimensions.
Yeah, they hate the industrial factions.
Because the Wild Forgers believe that true strength and positive karmic weight comes from cultivating and adapting alongside life, rather than mass-producing, strip mining, and consuming cold steel.
To a wild forger, labor is only sacred when it creates or nurtures something living. Industrialization is viewed as an ultimate karmic sin.
It's such a fascinating ideological clash, cultivation versus consumption.
But of course, because this is the tavern, there's an ultimate countermeasure for everything. If an ideological conflict gets too out of hand, or if an anomaly threatens the root system of the building itself, the tavern deploys its ultimate white mechanic, the karma excision engine.
The visual description of the excision engine is truly nightmare-inducing. It's the apex consequence of the entire system.
When total system failure threatens, an abyss opens up in the floor of the tavern, and this entity rises out of it. It's an altar-headed giant.
But it's not a machine made of stone or metal?
No. The excision engine is built entirely out of the compiled, stitched-together corpses of failed adventurers.
The lore details its construction so meticulously. A swordsman's arm ends in a cleric's hand. A mage's skull is fused into a shield-bearer's chest. It's a walking contradiction of combat roles bound together by execution chains.
It's the perfect inversion of identity. It takes everything that makes a hero unique, their class, their skills, their history, and violently crushes it into a homogeneous, faceless enforcer.
It is designed to completely eradicate the target.
It's the ultimate manifestation of physical consequence. All of those failed choices, all of the bad karma from thousands of dead adventurers, physically compiled to pass judgment on the next intruder.
It's a stunning piece of fictional world building. We see this incredibly brutal, highly structured binary system of punitive karma operating within the tavern. But it forces us to ask a larger question. How does this fictional representation of karma align with the actual historical philosophy?
That's a huge point.
Because we hear the word karma constantly in modern discourse, but its true meaning has been significantly distorted.
That is exactly where we're pivoting next. We're moving from the fictional slaughterhouse of the tavern to the real-world Eastern philosophy that inspired the concept.
Right, into Vedic astrology.
Yes, which completely reframes this idea of cosmic consequence. Because in the West, we throw the word karma around so casually. We say things like instant karma or bad karma when someone cuts us off in traffic and then immediately gets a flat tire a mile down the road.
We view it as a system of cosmic revenge.
Yes, the Western interpretation often reduces karma to a divine vending machine. Put good deeds in, get a reward. Put bad deeds in, get punished by the excision engine.
But in Vedic astrology and broader Eastern philosophy, karma does not imply a sentient judge doling out rewards and punishments. The word karma simply translates to action.
Action. It's the basic physics of cause and effect, applied to the journey of a soul instead of the trajectory of a billiard ball.
Precisely. Every single action, thought, and word sets up a consequence that will inevitably ripple outward and return.
And the core tenet of this tradition holds that you did not arrive in this current life with a blank slate. You didn't start at zero.
You arrived with the momentum of karma already in motion from previous actions. You stepped onto a moving train.
To explain how this intersects with the concepts of fate and free will, we have to examine this profound analogy used in these teachings, the concept of the 13 cards.
Oh, the 13 cards. This is such a crucial framework.
I found this analogy absolutely staggering when I read it. It's so clean and so devastating. The idea is this. At the exact moment of your birth, you are dealt 13 completely unchangeable cards. These cards represent the immutable, undeniable facts of your baseline existence.
They define your starting parameters.
Right. These cards include your parents, who they are, their flaws, their strengths. They include your genetic makeup, your DNA, your physical predispositions. They dictate the exact era in history you are born into, your country of origin, your mother tongue, and the socioeconomic status of the family that raises you.
And you did not ask to be born into that specific configuration, and you absolutely did not get to pick your hand.
No, you are simply thrown into this churning turmoil of pre-existing karma. You're handed these 13 cards by the universe and told to play.
And this is where the tool of a Vedic birth chart becomes highly relevant. A birth chart is often misunderstood as a fortune teller's sealed fate, like a rigid script of exactly what will happen to you.
Which it isn't.
Right. In this philosophical framework, the birth chart is merely a map of the ripened slice of accumulated karma you are tasked with dealing with in this specific lifetime. You aren't dealing with all of your karma, just the slice that is active now.
And the chart is incredibly detailed. It's broken down into houses, and each house represents a specific domain of human life. You have a house for career, a house for intimate relationships, a house for health, a house for hidden enemies.
The chart shows you which of these houses are carrying heavy karmic debts that need to be settled.
And it also provides the timing of when these debts will come due through a system called the dasha.
A dasha is a planetary period. For example, you might enter a Saturn dasha, which can last for nearly 2 decades.
2 decades of Saturn. That sounds heavy.
It is. Saturn is traditionally associated with restriction, hard work, delay, and harsh truths. If your chart indicates you're entering a Saturn period that activates your 7th house of relationships, you can expect profound, inescapable challenges and restructuring in your marriages or business partnerships during that time.
So when you lay it out like that, the unchangeable 13 cards, the specific houses of debt, the inevitable timing of a difficult dasha, it sounds incredibly deterministic.
I can see why it sounds that way.
If my chart says I am entering a grueling planetary period, if I'm about to hit incredibly rough waters, is that the end of the story? Is it like being told my ship is definitively going to sink? Am I entirely doomed by the hand of 13 cards I was forced to draw?
No. And that is the crucial distinction between fatalism and the philosophy of karma. The philosophy uses another highly evocative metaphor to explain this balance. The astrological chart, the ripened karma, is the river.
The river.
The river has a set course. The chart shows you the speed of the current, the location of the sharp bends, the stretches of jagged rapids, and the periods of calm, glassy water. You cannot change the fact that the river has rapids. That is your fate. Those are your 13 cards. However, you are the sailor on that river.
You're a sailor. You're navigating the vessel.
Exactly. When you hit the rapids, when you enter that difficult Saturn dasha, you have free will in how you navigate it. You can sail that river with blind panic. You can fight the current, exhaust yourself, blame the river for being wet, and ultimately capsize.
Which a lot of people do.
They do. Or you can grip the rudder. You can sail with grace, with strategy, with endurance. The difficulty outlined in your chart is simply the curriculum your soul signed up for to learn a specific lesson.
So the rapids aren't there to drown you. They're there to teach you how to steer. And how you respond to those themes, how you choose to sail the river in the moment of crisis, that is the new karma you are generating right now.
Exactly. You are not just a passive passenger tied to the mast. You are an active co-author of your future state.
The 13 cards are your initial conditions. But how you play the hand determines the ultimate outcome of the game.
The philosophical texts provide 2 more memorable metaphors to truly cement this concept of overcoming initial conditions. The first is the goat tied to the rope.
Right. Imagine a goat tied to a wooden stake in a field by a length of rope. The goat can walk around, it can graze, it has a degree of freedom, but it can only graze as far as the physical length of the rope allows.
That rope represents the constraints of your fate, the limitations of your 13 cards. It is your socioeconomic starting point, your physical limitations.
But the philosophy argues, the individual possesses the capacity to generate a storm of karma.
A storm of karma.
Yeah, this refers to intense, relentless, internal awakening, discipline, and profound hard work. If the goat pulls hard enough, consistently enough, the friction and the force will eventually snap the rope. You can expand beyond your initial karmic conditions if you are willing to unleash that internal storm.
But snapping that rope is agonizingly hard work, especially because modern society is entirely built on noise, distraction, and the desire for instant gratification. We want the rope to disappear overnight.
Which leads directly to the second metaphor, the Chinese bamboo tree.
The bamboo tree is the ultimate symbol of karmic patience.
When you plant a Chinese bamboo seed, you have to water it and nurture the soil for 5 entire years while it remains buried in the dark. For 5 years, you see absolutely nothing above ground. No shoots, no leaves. To the outside observer, it looks like a patch of barren dirt.
But beneath the surface, in the total darkness, the plant is building this incredibly massive, dense, complex root system.
It's lonely, unglamorous, difficult work with zero visible reward or validation.
But then, in its 5th year, once the root system is fully established to support massive growth, the bamboo finally breaks the surface of the soil, and when it does, it shoots up to the sun, growing up to 90 feet in just a few weeks.
That is the preparation for karma. It's a vital reminder that dealing with your karmic debts, navigating the rapids, and building the strength to snap the rope is rarely glamorous, and it's almost never immediate. It requires a profound capacity for patience and endurance in the dark, trusting that the root system you're building will eventually support the growth you desire.
Speaking of enduring in the dark and the utterly unglamorous reality of human history, let's pivot away from philosophy and look at the physical realities of the past.
Oh man, this is where it gets rough.
It really does. We have spent time discussing the romanticized dark fantasy of the Broken Tavern, where adventurers battle cosmic forces and wield bioluminescent magic. But if we look at the actual medieval period that inspires these fantasy settings, the daily reality was profoundly less cosmic and significantly more visceral.
Yeah, we love to romanticize the medieval aesthetic. We imagine ourselves in gleaming plate armor, sitting in a tavern, drinking ale, and having dramatic, brooding monologues about our destiny. But real medieval life, it was way less about fighting demons and way, way more about avoiding literal physical garbage.
It is incredibly easy to view history through a cinematic lens that conveniently edits out the smell and the disease. The day-to-day reality of the Middle Ages, particularly in urban centers, was a grueling exercise in surviving an unsanitary environment.
It was hostile architecture in a completely different way.
We have documentation detailing the most unusual and fundamentally disgusting professions of the era, which illustrate just how hostile the physical environment was.
Let's look at the infrastructure of medieval London. When we think of a city today, we take sanitation for granted. Medieval London did not have paved sidewalks, subterranean sewers, or weekly trash collection.
People walked on bare, compacted earth.
Except, it wasn't just earth. Between the dense human population and the massive number of horses, pigs, and cattle moving through the city, the urban center produced an estimated 50 tons of excrement every single day.
50 tons daily.
Yeah, and because there was no underground infrastructure, there was nowhere for it to go.
It ended up directly on the streets, mixing with the mud, the blood and entrails from the butchers, and rotting food waste. It created a literal sludge that covered the thoroughfares.
This environmental hazard created a specific system of consequence. The city needed the muckraker.
The muckraker had arguably the most horrendous yet vital job in the urban ecosystem. Their entire profession was dedicated to physically shoveling and clearing this toxic sludge from the main roads just to keep the city marginally navigable.
And this sheer volume of waste dictated the social behaviors of the era. If you ever wondered why European noblemen started using sedan chairs, being carried around in boxes by other men, or why they wore elaborate protective wooden overshoes called pattens, it wasn't just a fashion statement.
No, they physically could not walk down the street without ruining their expensive silk clothes and leather boots in literal feces.
The environment forced the invention of elevated transport.
And if the streets were that hazardous, the state of medical science was equally grim. Consider the profession of the piss prophet, which was formerly known as a water squirter.
Oh God, this one is rough.
It's a stark reminder of the limits of empirical knowledge at the time. A piss prophet was a medical practitioner who diagnosed internal illnesses by extensively examining the patient's urine. They would look at the color, they would smell it, and brace yourself, they would actively taste it.
I cannot even fathom the psychological fortitude required to do that as your daily career.
As entirely repulsive as it sounds to our modern sensibilities, it actually had a foundational scientific basis within the limits of their technology. They were operating on the theory of the four humors, and urine was a primary indicator of internal balance. By tasting it, they could accurately diagnose conditions like diabetes.
Which they call the pissing evil.
Right, because the urine of a diabetic patient would taste distinctly sweet due to the excess glucose.
They had incredibly detailed reference charts, right? Like the urine wheels.
Yes, the urine wheels.
Yeah.
They had charts detailing over 20 different colors and consistencies of urine, ranging from white as well water indicating poor digestion, to ruddy as pure intense gold indicating a fever.
The physical methodology, the necessity of tasting it to confirm a diagnosis, highlights just how terrifying an unshielded existence was before the advent of modern chemistry and germ theory.
The next time you're sitting at your desk feeling completely overwhelmed by a flood of emails in your inbox, just take a deep breath and remind yourself that you are not currently trudge walking through 50 tons of medieval street sludge, and absolutely no one is asking you to taste test their bodily fluids to figure out why they have a stomachache.
That is a very grounding perspective. However, it's important to note that medieval life wasn't entirely defined by muck and misery. The sheer harshness of the environment demanded an equally extreme form of escapism.
She definitely did.
This is why professions dedicated purely to spectacle and status were so highly valued. Consider the master of the revels.
Oh, the master of the revels. That was a serious position.
It was.
Yeah.
They were a high-ranking official entirely in charge of organizing court entertainment. And court entertainment in this era was not just a nice string quartet playing in the background of a dinner. It was a massive, aggressive flex of political power and unimaginable wealth.
The historical records detail the 1454 Feast of the Pheasant, hosted by Philip the Good, the Duke of Burgundy. This event was designed to promote a crusade, but the execution was pure, absurd pageantry.
This wasn't a dinner party. It was surrealist theater. The banquet featured a pie so massively constructed that there were 28 musicians sitting inside the crust playing instruments.
28 musicians in a pie.
Inside a pie, they had actors dressed as mythical beasts and singers performing while dressed entirely as horses. It was lavish, overwhelming spectacle.
It functioned as a psychological counterweight. In a world defined by rampant disease, 50 tons of daily waste, and constant brutal warfare, projecting absolute control through absurd opulence was a survival strategy for the ruling class. It was a way to manufacture awe in a deeply unpredictable world.
And we can see exactly how unpredictable and grim that world was by reading the first-hand accounts. Look at the writings of Nithard, a Frankish historian chronicling events around the year 840 CE. Nithard was documenting the chaotic, violent breakup of the Carolingian Empire.
Nithard's histories read exactly like the plot of a grimdark fantasy novel, but it was all completely real.
It was a war of three brothers, as the sons of Emperor Louis the Pious tore the empire apart, fighting for supreme control.
It has every element of a modern prestige television drama.
Seriously, you have rampant betrayals, rumors of witchcraft, concubines manipulating the court, former kings having their heads shaved and being locked away in monasteries, and sudden, devastating Viking raids sweeping in to slaughter everyone while they were distracted by civil war.
What is most striking about Nithard's work is the profound, pervasive cynicism that saturates his writing. He is not writing a heroic epic. He is writing a tragedy of immense scale.
His very final entry is haunting.
Yes. Written shortly before he was killed in battle against Viking raiders, it discusses a massive, unseasonable spring snowstorm that hit the region in 843 CE.
He writes about this snowstorm destroying the crops, and his final recorded thought is, I mention this because rapine and wrongs of every sort were rampant on all sides, and now the unseasonable weather killed the last hope of any good to come.
Killed the last hope of any good to come. It is a devastatingly bleak perspective. It is the exact tone of a grimdark protagonist staring into the abyss of an uncaring universe.
So if that is the baseline reality, if you're living in a world where the streets are toxic, the medicine is horrifying, the empire is burning down, and the weather itself is killing your last hope, how on earth did the average human being cope with that? How did they navigate a system of consequence that was that unrelentingly brutal without simply giving up?
They coped using the exact same psychological mechanism that we use today when faced with overwhelming systemic pressure.
Humor.
They used humor, they used memes, they used the absurdity of their situation to deflate the terror of it.
Yes, human nature fundamentally has not changed in 1,000 years. We have this incredible historical document, a collection of literal jokes from a 15th century manuscript called the Facetiae, compiled by an Italian humanist named Poggio Bracciolini.
The Facetiae is amazing.
Reading these jokes proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that medieval people had the exact same irreverent, ridiculous sense of humor that we do on the internet today.
Humor is the ultimate defense mechanism against a hostile environment. It allows you to momentarily step outside the system of consequence and laugh at its structural flaws.
The jokes in the Facetiae are surprisingly modern. Let me share a few of them. Here is one about infidelity and sheer gullibility. There's a man having an affair with the wife of a man who happens to have a severe stutter. The lover goes to the house late one night, knocks on the door, and perfectly mimics the stuttering husband's voice to ask for entry.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The actual husband is sitting right there in the house, hears the knock, hears his own voice being mimicked, and yells to his wife, "Giovanna, open the door, let him in. For it does seem to be me."
It's a classic, perfectly structured sitcom misunderstanding. The absurdity of a man recognizing his own voice and concluding that the person outside must therefore be him is timeless comedy.
Here's another one that deals with the economic anxieties of the era. A man buys his wife a very beautiful but incredibly expensive dress. And every single time they're intimate, he complains bitterly that the act is costing him more than a golden ducat each time because he is factoring in what he spent on the dress.
Classic complaining spouse trope.
Right, so the wife finally gets tired of the complaining and replies, "It is your fault. Why do you not, by frequent repetition, bring down the cost to 1 farthing?"
She is applying basic cost-per-use economics to silence his complaining. It is brilliant, and it shows a highly sophisticated, pragmatic approach to navigating interpersonal conflict through wit.
And my absolute favorite from the collection, because it's just so profoundly silly. A group of distinguished people in Florence are sitting around having a philosophical discussion, wishing for grand things. One says he wishes to be the Pope, another wishes he were a wealthy king. A talkative, annoying child is sitting nearby and interrupts, saying, "I wish I were a melon."
A melon.
The adults stop, confused, and ask him why on earth he would want to be a melon. The kid smiles and says, "Because everyone would smell my bottom."
Which requires context for a modern listener. It's a direct reference to the medieval market practice of sniffing the bottom of a melon before buying it to check if it was ripe.
It's a fart joke. It is a 15th century fart joke, dressed up as a philosophical wish. This kind of humor was not just entertainment, it was a vital psychological coping mechanism. It allowed them to find joy, absurdity, and a sense of shared humanity in a world that was constantly trying to grind them down.
And we see this exact same dynamic, this injection of absurdity into a grim environment, playing out in modern tabletop role-playing games. When players are engaged in these incredibly intense, high-stakes, grim, dark campaigns, like exploring the lethal architecture of the Broken Tavern, the psychological weight of constantly navigating Rule 10 becomes exhausting.
It's too much tension.
Right. To survive the game, the players naturally inject comedy.
We see this all the time with house rules in games like Dungeons & Dragons. DMs will introduce discount and defective magic items. The idea is that the party finds an item that is technically imbued with magic, but its practical application is entirely useless or absurd.
The classic example provided in the analysis is an alchemist's jug that, instead of producing useful liquids like fresh water or acid, only produces large quantities of mayonnaise.
And the beauty of it is that the players absolutely loved it. Instead of throwing it away, they kept the mayonnaise jug for several sessions. They used it for ridiculous bits. They tried to solve complex dungeon puzzles by aggressively deploying mayonnaise, until they finally traded it to a camp of bewildered kobolds.
They used the absurdity of the item to relieve the tension of navigating a dangerous, lethal fantasy world. It gave them a moment to breathe.
However, there is a very important caveat we must address when we discuss how we consume these grim, dark narratives today. When we listen to actual play tabletop shows or watch streams on networks like Critical Role or the Glass Cannon Network, we must remember that what we are experiencing as an audience is a highly curated illusion.
Right. Those shows are incredibly entertaining, but they are edited. They edit out the boring parts. They cut out the hour-long, frustrating arguments over a specific rules interpretation. They trim down the stretches of the game where the players are just wandering around confused, achieving nothing.
There are instances where shows have entirely re-recorded entire sessions because the organic gameplay wasn't narratively satisfying enough.
That curation creates a very specific psychological illusion for the listener. As an audience, we deeply desire the feeling of a brutal, unforgiving world. We want to experience the grim stakes of the broken tavern, the threat of the excision engine, the tragedy of Neithart's histories.
But we want to experience those things with the absolute safety of a curated, entertaining, forward-moving narrative.
We want the aesthetic thrill of Rule 10, without ever actually being asked to sacrifice our own eyes to the spire lasers.
We want the consequence without the cost. Well, we have covered a truly staggering amount of ground today, crossing multiple disciplines and centuries. Let's synthesize all of this. We started by looking at Eros Serenen deliberately dropping the floor of a 1960s living room to force people into intimate, inescapable conversation.
Then we journeyed through a fictional cosmic tavern that intelligently weaponizes its own architecture to digest the psychological flaws of the people inside it.
We examined the profound philosophy of Vedic astrology, where the 13 cards of your birth dictate the karmic river you're forced to sail. And we dragged ourselves through the literal physical muck of medieval London, learning how people survived the grinding reality of their era using 15th century melon jokes and absurd pageantry.
What every single one of these examples demonstrates is that we are constantly, inevitably navigating systems of consequence. Whether those systems are the physical architecture of the buildings we live in, the spiritual laws of cause and effect dictating our life path, or the brutal, unyielding realities of history and environment, the space around us demands a reaction.
You cannot be a passive observer in your own life. The environment will act upon you.
So as you go through your week, remember the analogy of the river. You may have been dealt your 13 cards without your permission. You absolutely did not ask for the specific turmoil of karma, the specific anxieties, or the specific societal constraints you were born into.
But how you choose to play those cards, whether you sail the rapids of your life with panic and bitterness, or whether you grip the rudder and sail with grace, with relentless hard work, and maybe armed with a few well-timed absurd jokes, that is the true storm of karma.
That is how you build the root system in the dark. That is how you snap the rope.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, drawing one last time from the unforgiving lore of the Broken Tavern. In that universe, the true survivors, the ones who make it through the grinding, are the ones marked by permanent physical scars.
Those scars are not seen as deformities. They act as a map. They are the literal physical ledger of what that specific person was willing to sacrifice to survive Rule 10. They had to willingly give up a piece of themselves to move forward.
Because nothing ever returns from the tavern completely intact. Growth requires shedding the old self.
Exactly. So I ask you to look inward and think about the invisible Rule 10 scars that you carry from your own life. Think about the parts of your personality you had to harden, the naive beliefs you had to abandon, or the relationships you had to sever to get through your own periods of grinding consequence.
And ask yourself this: if the universe suddenly demanded an equivalent sacrifice from you right now, a permanent, irrevocable surrender, in order to open the door to your ultimate life goal, what part of your past, what comfort, or what flaw would you be willing to leave behind in the void?
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky. Diagnostic muddy waters indeed.
See you next time.